to the meeting of the Cape Cod Commission at the Cape Cod Commission. It is Thursday, April 12, 2012 at 3 p.m. I would ask the secretary to call roll.
Barnstable, Redding Richardson.
Present.
Bourne, Michael Blanton. Brewster, Elizabeth Taylor, present. Chatham, Lynn Plechner.
Present.
Dennis, Richard Roy.
Present.
East Hampshire, Brookshire. Falmouth, Spigot. Harwich, Robert Bradley. Mashpee, Ernest Virgilio. Orleans, Leonard Short.
Here.
Provincetown, Austin Knight.
Present.
Sandwich, Joanna Peak. Present. Borough, Peter Graham.
Here.
Wellfleet, Roger Putnam.
Here.
Yarmouth, John McCormick Jr. County Commissioner Mary Pat Flynn. Here. Minority Representative John Harris.
Here.
Native American Representative Mark Harding. Governor's appointee Herb Olson.
Here.
But we have a quorum.
Thank you. At this time, I would ask for anyone wishing to make comment, public comment before the commission, please do so. Stand and identify yourself. Seeing none, I have something to comment on, and it's always, you know, a mixed feeling, you know, kind of sad, but kind of happy too, you know, and go on to do. So I'd like to recognize Lynn Pluckner for her service to the Cape Cod Commission and present her.
I guess I should stand up.
No, you don't need to. It's never a little bit formal, you're fine. But this commemorative remembrance of the commission.
Well, thank you.
And she served on numerous DRI subcommittees. She chaired subcommittees, was a great chair. Always asked excellent questions, provided great comments and insights to our proceedings. So you will be missed. So good luck and thank you for your service.
Well, thank you. It has been. It's been a pleasure being part of this august body, and I think the Cape doesn't realize how lucky they are that the Commission has the kind of structure that it has, one town, one vote. And I think because of that, we come to consensus more often than another committee. And I think everybody should be applauded for the job that they do. And it's been, as I said, it's been a pleasure to work with all of you and get to know all of you. I do have your emails, so don't worry. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Okay. A few things. I would just note that county commissioners, and a lot of very intelligent people, spend a lot of time taking a look at county governance. And there is this report. If you don't have one, there are several copies that I have here in the middle of the table for your, I don't know if you have one, John Royden. So please take one, read it. Some very thought-provoking and insightful remarks regarding how we conduct business and structure ourselves and proceed with the process, as well as people and what kind of products we come up with. So, thanks, sir. At this time, I would ask our Executive Director, Mr. Niedzwiecki, for his report, and that will segue into the fourth item, which is Strategic Information Office. So please proceed.
Just two quick things. I want to thank Lynn for her representation of Chatham on the commission. She's been great to work with, and I have your email too. And then secondly, I just want to remind commission members that the Smarter Cape Conference is going to be held on May 14th and 15th, starting at noon on 14th, which is a Monday, and then running with a dinner that night and then running all day on Tuesday. And that's at the Seacrest in Falmouth. And if you want more information, you want to register, there's a website, smartercapesummit, all one word, .com. And with that, I think maybe we'll just sort of segue into this.
Good.
We have been giving a couple of presentations, and I was really grateful that so many of you could make the press conference that we had last week when we talked about the wastewater tool. It was great to have so many of you here. I think we got a lot of good press on that. I think we're starting to set the record straight on the kind of regional planning we're doing about wastewater here at the Commission. And it all runs in and ties up to this Strategic Information Office also. And so I'm going to give you a short presentation on the SIO, and then I'm going to give those of you who haven't seen it a presentation on wastewater. We're not going to run the live model. They're working on it, so they need it. But we have some still shots that we'll show you. Strategic Information Office, you know, what is it? Well, we have at the Commission and have had since its inception a fairly important department, our GIS department. Obviously, a land use management agency takes maps pretty seriously. And so from the beginning, maps have been important. And GIS was really a reactive department, so people would go down and say, I need a map, and 20 years ago they would draw it and color it in. Technology keeps changing, and we get more and more data, and almost every data point that we have now, ultimately for our purposes, winds up getting tied to a map in some way. But as technology has changed, it's become a little bit easier to use some of the technical GIS tools. So whether you're an engineer or a planner or a hydrologist now, if you're coming out of school with that degree, you have some capability as it relates to GIS. And also there's a lot less paper. So we don't see the paper maps anymore. You see more of these electronic presentations where you can, that are much more dynamic because you can call it the layers you want to see specifically. What that has done in the industry, really, is given those very smart technical people who now are less reactive, it's given them more time to innovate. You know, and that's not just something that we've seen here at the Commission. It's something that they've seen in business and in other NGOs across the country. So that has happened. So our GIS department has gone from being a reactive GIS department to being a very proactive information department. And so really what we're going to do is we're going to morph them into this Strategic Information Office. But when we look at sort of the long-term vision, what we want this sort of new role for GIS, the SIO, we really look at the future role of county government, you know, which is, it pertains in many respects to some of those recommendations in that report. But we are lucky to have a viable and vibrant county government that has resources attached to it. That's, you know, a benefit for us. But there's always this tension between the towns and the county, which I think is a little bit ridiculous and doesn't really need to be there. The towns provide those direct operational functions that the county's never going to do. So the county in the past has been there to look at certain services that need to be provided, find if there's if the regional economy of scale is an appropriate one, then they can step in, use some of those resources to subsidize those services. And that's really what's happened. But when you look at the future and Government 2.0, smarter government efforts, and there'll be a lot of discussion about this at the Smarter Cape Conference, you really start to see that the future of regional government is really based in information. And that's, I think, the direction that we're starting to head in. So we have our Strategic Information Office here. The county commissioners have really charged us to merge that with this regional umbrella services system. So it contemplates now the ability to use all the data that we have here and think about it critically and really develop applications that we can then push to the towns. And the bottom line being that these applications should help them solve problems and help them provide services at a higher quality service at a lower cost to taxpayers. So we're excited about this. I think we have a couple of examples that we can show you. So there really is a paradigm shift, as I explained, from this reactive data collection to a proactive data management. and then using data to perform complex analysis to create transparency and understanding. And really, that's what we can do and put it on a map. You know, you can talk about very complex public policy issues, and people don't really know what you're talking about. As soon as you put it on a map, they start to understand it. So it's that ability to present it graphically that makes some of these complex issues much more digestible for decision makers and for the general public. And then also, in almost every circumstance that we looked at, there is the ability to use this to do things and solve problems and provide services better, faster, cheaper. So it is about efficiency. So the purpose of the SIO really is to facilitate efficiency in government and innovation in business through the open provision of reliable and relevant data. This will be on an open platform, so it will make government more efficient, but it will also be available to citizens and to private businesses too. And so I think it has the potential to positively impact them. Now, when we look at the SIO data development process, you know, we do have this very large and ever-expanding data warehouse here at the Commission. When I got here 4.5 years ago, we used to store information in more of an 18th century mentality. There were literally piles of paper on the floor. Thankfully, we have transitioned into the digital world. And it just allows us to play with the information and think about it differently than when it's on paper. So really what we have is the metadata management associated with that large database. And so we think about that, we try to understand it, to sort of discover a model. You know, we want to govern information structure and content as we understand it. And then we want to cleanse it. And that's what we do a lot of here. Standardize, merge, and correct information are, I think, in the industry, they refer to it as scrubbing the data. And that's because there are a lot of data sets out there, like a lot of the census block data groups that we have are relevant, but they're these big one-size-fits-all approaches. And then some of the data sets, the larger ones that we get from the state, really need to be corrected. You know, we have an Esri, which is a company, a data set that we purchased for them for business, small business, and they had a package store in Provincetown that had 400 employees. And maybe on the 4th of July, but that was it. So those are the kind of sort of anomalies we go through and we scrub, and that's part of the value that we add, is not just using and thinking about the data, but scrubbing it, making the data really good and relevant here, taking paper data sets and making them electronic, and then taking incomplete data sets and making them complete. But even on top of that, what we have developed the capacity to do in-house is really create our own data sets that are really unique to the Cape. So we understand them, we cleanse them, and then we transform them. So we combine and restructure information for new uses. And this is a really important piece. And really within the last year at the Commission, we have pushed ourselves in the GIS department, and we've gone beyond just creating data layers, storing them, and stacking them in order to tell a story. We now have the ability to use geometrics to develop algorithms to tie them together in a smart way, to produce basically smart maps that will tell you very specific things that you want to know, and be able to do that really on a regional level. So that takes the process of taking complicated information in the public realm, in a public discussion, and making it a lot easier to understand. And then ultimately the delivery. You know, we've got to synchronize and virtualize and move information for that sort of inline delivery. And this is really where the regional utility services system comes in, our ability to push that. So we start with the metadata, that big data warehouse, and then we move towards unified deployment of particular applications that pull down from that big data warehouse. So part of the thought process behind using the information really is about understanding it, then designing your application, and then how are you going to govern it and how are you going to put it out there. So it's about planning and then discovering, analyzing, defining, developing, deploying, monitoring, optimizing, and managing. I mean, all of this has to be part of a coordinated data management system and management. So we think about as we understanding, what's required, what assets exist, what's the quality of the data that we have, what's the solution? If we're looking to solve a problem, what's the solution? How can it be built? What's the infrastructure? And then, is the information trusted? Is it good? Do we get good information out? And then, how can efficiency be improved? And is my information well managed at the end? I mean, it has to be well managed. So this is a fairly straight up project. And as many of you know, we have been working with IBM for 2 years. We've been dancing a little bit. We don't have necessarily a project to show you, although we may soon. But we have learned a lot from them in the process. And part of it is how you sort of think and use data, and that's been very helpful. So when we look at the Strategic Information Office, it's really about innovation and design. And we have a lot of information. We have obviously the capacity for design, community design here, and information design. We also have the capacity at the Commission for analysis, especially statistical analysis. So it's at the intersection of all of this where the future of land use planning, the future of smarter government, I think, resides and is moving. So that's really what it's about. And just as sort of a rough estimation of how it's going to look like, we have this big data warehouse. This is part of what we worked out with the county commissioners. And then we have our GIS program here. So what will happen is we'll have a Strategic Information Office with a GIS program. And we're not anticipating hiring any new employees to do this. I know that has been a stated concern by others. But we have the data warehouse, then we have a GIS program that's really going to coordinate it. And then what we have over here is a really important piece that we're just now beginning to put together as we go around and visit boards of selectmen, and that's a governance committee. And so we want one person from each town, because this structure really supports the towns. So we want one person from each town who will meet and discuss what their problems are, what their challenges are, what kind of information they need to address that, how they need to present that to the public. And so the ideas for the applications, how we're going to sort of use that data warehouse and pull down that information, will come from the governance committee. So it's not going to be here at the commission us thinking, well, this is cool, why don't we sort of do this? And then we spend 6 months developing an application that nobody needs and wants. So we are definitely not going to do that. It's really going to be sort of a ground up. We've had tremendous success in the SEDS project and in so many other projects of the RPP review when we've done that, when we really have had a ground-up approach. Now, what will happen, this is really where the regional utility services system comes in, and then we'll push applications. Now, we have this Viper program now, and this is a program that was developed in-house. Gary Cram did a lot of work on it, and it's available to fire departments. And so now, when there's a fire, they program in the address, and the Viper program will tell them if there is an environmentally sensitive area in proximity to the fire so that they can use the correct materials when they put out the fire. And we developed that in-house, and that's basically copyright. There was some intellectual property associated with that. And then we have e-permitting, which started in Yarmouth, who did a lot of work. They have a gentleman over there who works for the town by the name of Ed Centeo, who's very knowledgeable and has a lot of private sector experience. They have really streamlined what they do to do more e-permitting. A lot of towns say they do e-permitting, but all that means is that they have their regular sort of permits on PDF files that people can download. So that's not e-permitting from my perspective. It's certainly not how we define it here at the Commission. So when Ed was out there sort of thinking about doing an e-permitting program, he wanted to take the next step, and it requires some big licenses and really elaborate sort of software systems. And what he discovered is that it would have cost the town of Yarmouth as much to do it on its own as it would cost the entire county. Because there's something magic about that 250,000 population number as it relates to buying some of these licenses. So that was nice, because that became a real no-brainer for a regional project. So we partnered with Yarmouth and led a discussion Cape-wide, and we had 14 out of 15 towns agree to to partner with us on this e-permitting program. And we applied for money that's brand new from the state this year, and it's in what's called a Community Innovation Challenge grant. And it's all about smarter government. It's about efficiencies, it's about regionalizing, it's about using information. So it was right in our wheelhouse. And we applied. There was $4 million available statewide. There were 100 applications representing 280 of the 351 municipalities. 28 applications were granted, and one was ours, and we got the biggest one at $500,000. So we got $500,000 of the $4 million. It was the largest one, larger than the city of Boston, who got $400,000. And we like to kid them because the city of Boston has a fairly elaborate innovation program. They've turned the South Boston waterfront really into an innovation district. And they've created, under the mayor, this department called New Urban Mechanics. And they really are all about information. So you've probably heard about the program where you can take your PDA or your phone, you take a picture of a pothole, it gets GPS and uploaded. That's them. So they do that kind of stuff. And staff here has had the opportunity several times, because IBM has made that connection over the years, to work to talk to New Urban Mechanics and Nigel and Chris up there about the things that we do. We had an opportunity a couple of weeks ago to meet with them in Cambridge at IBM's research facility there. So we like to kid them that we get $100,000 more, but in reality we will be coordinating a lot with the city of Boston on that program, making sure that we're using similar platforms, because we want to be able to share this data with everyone. So that's the e-permitting. Now, the program itself has to be up and running by December 31st, like just about every other major mega project that we have going on this year. So there will be some functionality given to all towns, and we're even going to include the town that didn't sign up originally. But a couple of towns we're actually going to provide much more in-depth services, and so we're looking at contracting, building services, and things like dog licenses. Because those three things cover different parameters. Dog license, for example, a lot of people don't register their dogs because it's too much of a hassle to go down to town hall, and especially when you're like 3 months late, it's embarrassing. But if you could do it at home, you'd probably be more likely to do it. So part of that is to test whether the convenience of basically having a virtual town hall is actually going to bump revenues for towns, which I think it has the possibility of doing. The other area is sort of building services. So in the not too distant future, you could imagine a building inspector who wakes up at home with an iPad, and his route for the day, his inspections, is already mapped out for him. So he doesn't even go to the office, he goes to the route, but then he can take pictures where he's at. That's automatically uploaded. He can take in information about contractors that are on there. That ultimately will be able to interface with the state database, so that from a consumer protection perspective, we'll be able to check and make sure it's a certified contractor. And then he can go on to the next job. And for the first time, instead of all of that information being in paper, it'll be electronic. Now, so then it becomes data instead of paper. And we can think critically about it. For example, not that this is part of the plan, but we don't know anything about building permits here at the Cape Cod Commission. You would think as a growth management land use aid, that would probably be a pretty important data set. We don't have any of it, because the towns keep it in paper and they don't want to share it. If we did, over time, know how many building permits had been pulled and for what purpose, we would be able to modify our regulations to react to the real situation out there instead of an imagined one. That means fewer one-size-fits-all approaches, approaches that are much more tailored, and probably approaches that have a much lighter touch than the ones that we do right now. So that, I think, is the promise of e-permitting in the future. And then we get into the wastewater tool here. I think this is my favorite example of how to use data. Wastewater, as you all know, and we discussed last time, is really, it's the biggest environmental concern that we have on the Cape. And will probably lead to the largest capital construction project that the Cape has ever seen. So what we did is we say, well, how can we use information to solve that problem? And we've been working on a regional wastewater management plan for a couple of years. It was basically a policy document, and we really stood behind towns and watched towns go forward with their individual plans, and supported that. But we run into very similar things in most communities, which is, I think people recognize the problem. But then when you talk about a solution, it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And as soon as that price tag shows up, it's, well, no, the science is no good, the engineering is no good, and we're going to vote no at town meeting. And that's a predictable response. So having been at some of those town meetings and watched this go along, we started to think, what kind of information could we provide to the towns that would make this discussion an easier one to have? And so that's really led to sort of how we could sort of use some of this information. And that's where our GIS department really kicked in. Ann Reynolds and Jay Dachin's thinking about how we can use data, and then Phil Dascom from the planning department, and then Scott Michaud and Tom Camberg from the water department have all worked really as a team to develop what I think is an unprecedented and first-class application. Not only one that has extraordinary technical upside to it, but one that has the ability to move public policy forward. It's a new way to engage the public, because what we want to do is to be able to present complicated facts in an easy-to-understand way. So before we started to design and use that data, we looked at our objective, and this has really been our stated objective for 4 years now. So you hear a lot about what the Cape Cod Commission's plans for wastewater are, but this is the reality. This is what it's always been. And it's really about restoring those degraded water bodies through a regional nutrient management policy that promotes appropriate infrastructure. We have always considered that whatever infrastructure you're using should be dependent on what is the most efficient infrastructure to use in a certain watershed or sub-watershed. So everything's on the table. Every treatment option should be considered. And obviously growth management mechanisms. The least expensive way to control the solution, the cost of the solution, is to make sure that we don't continue to sprawl in ways where we're allowing development that's going to have to be sewered, but you're going to have to run 2 miles of pipe to get there. That's when those systems become unsustainable. And right from the beginning, these mechanisms have to protect taxpayers from unnecessary costs. And the bottom line of this presentation going forward is about that. I mean, if we can show what the lowest possible cost is, because there are strong indicators that when towns cooperate in shared watersheds, if there were more of a regional approach, we would be able to save a significant amount of money. And so the pushback to this regional plan and blow up about MWRA style, is just very frustrating to me, because the people that are pushing that are basically saying, we only want taxpayers to have half of the information when they go and vote for how they want to deal with the solution. I think that that's recklessly irresponsible public policy. So as we went through last time, it clearly is a regional issue. These are the 46 nitrogen, these are the 46 watersheds that have been studied by the Massachusetts Estuaries Program to determine whether they're nitrogen sensitive or not. The blue ones cross town lines, the gray ones don't. 2/3 of these cross town lines. So you can see how difficult it is to solve the entire problem if you go on a town-by-town basis. Also, these 46 watersheds comprise almost 70%, about 183,000 acres of the Cape. So it's most of the landmass, beyond most of the landmass. And that 74% of the residential and 72% of the commercially developed parcels on the Cape are in those watersheds. So when we talk about the problem, it's not a coastal problem, it's not one town's problem. It is really our problem, because everybody in those watersheds is contributing. So how are we going to use the information, the wastewater application, to have a better discussion, more fact-based discussion? So we start with the MEP water quality model that they have at SMAS. And so we know a lot about the status of the estuaries and embayments that have been identified. What we've done, and what the state legislature asked us to do last year, is we put together a first-class land and water use information data set. And we've done a regional build-out associated with that. So we have a very sophisticated land use database for the Cape now that is regional in nature. We've been able to sort of use that in some of the information from the MEP to do nitrogen calculations. So all this data is on a parcel-specific level. And so we've been able to calculate nitrogen loads based on a model that Scott Michaud has developed for us. And so this is where these algorithms are developed internally, and then they're applied to the model. So we have checked the nitrogen calculations, particularly in Yarmouth. We have a lot of good information in Yarmouth. And so our nitrogen calculator produces a result that is extraordinarily close to the MEP result. And so that's good. What we were able to do a couple of weeks ago is to tie to that nitrogen calculation a cost model. So the cost model takes different treatment options, and it associates a cost with removing the nitrogen. So, ultimately what we will have, and it's part of the regional plan, is a list of almost every potential treatment option you could think of. The nitrogen removal rate of that option, the cost per pound of nitrogen removed, and the land use characteristics in which we believe that that option is most likely to succeed. All of which then can be sort of superimposed on the map. So that tells us how much a certain option is going to cost, and how much. This tells us how much nitrogen is going to be removed, and whether we're going to get to the TMDLs. And then ultimately we have a rate model that is being developed as we speak. It's a very powerful rate model that will be able to push to all 15 towns. So it will allow you to play around with different configurations for how you're going to pay for it. How much is going to go into general tax levy, how much is a betterment, how much you're going to get in as grants. So really, this wastewater planning application, when it's done, and we're going to show you right up to the beginning of the cost model today, but when it's done, you'll be able to go from the degraded situation in a bay to a solution that's going to clean it up and how much it's going to cost every household. And that has really never been done before. So we're going to do that, but we're not going to do it in a way that's top-down. This isn't a predictive model. This model, when we get it out there, is going to be able to allow people, decision makers, to come in and say, well, we want to use this treatment option in this place, and we're going to do IA systems here, and we're going to do centralized there, and see if they can meet the TMDLs and then get a cost associated with it, and then tie it to the rate model. And then even in the rate model, local decisions. How do you want to apportion those costs? So this becomes a very new way to have these discussions because it's not top-down. We're not dictating a particular plan. We're asking people to put their own assumptions about how to solve the problem into this model and see what happens. And that's what we've heard on town meeting floor. Well, why don't you do this? Why don't we all do composting toilets? Why don't we do urine diversion toilets? Wouldn't an IA system in everybody's backyard fix the problem? So it becomes a way to illustrate that too. But this model also empowers towns because it allows you to sort of narrow the consideration of how many sort of modeling runs you might want to submit to the MEP to get a specific and in-depth analysis. And so that has the potential to save towns a lot of money. What it also does, and what I think is making some of the engineering companies nervous, is it puts really for the first time the towns on better footing to have discussions with the engineering companies. Because none of the towns really have a lot of wastewater planning policy. And so they spend a lot of taxpayer money to go out and hire engineering firms. The engineering firms become the de facto wastewater policy experts for that town. And they are predisposed to solve everything with concrete and steel. And they're very conservative people. So this at least gives the town a little bit more information so they can ask better questions of the engineers. And I think that has the ability to save towns also. So when we look at the application, what it's going to calculate are land use characteristics. It will calculate flow, existing and future, based on the regional build-up we did, the nitrogen load existing in future, and then annual costs associated with construction and operation and maintenance. The cost model is still developing, but we're going to show you sort of what we have. So this is actually Yarmouth. This is 28 in Yarmouth here. And this is an example of how the model might work. You can draw a polygon around any number of parcels. So here we've randomly selected 8 parcels on 28 in Yarmouth. And there are several toggles that allow us to get better information. One of them has to do with attenuation. That means in that sub-watershed, what's the natural attenuation rate? How much nitrogen is going to be removed naturally? The other is the treatment factor. So depending on the treatment option, you are going to remove a certain amount of nitrogen. So that becomes very important. And then here is non-residential water use factors. This is primarily geared at trying to gauge future commercial development, because you never really know what's going to go in there and build it. There's a big difference between the water use of a bookstore and a restaurant. So we can toggle that a little bit. And the bottom one right now is the road pipe conversion factor. So we use road length as a gauge for how much pipe we're going to need. But we also know that you don't have to put a pipe under every roadway. So depending on the neighborhood we're in, we have the ability to sort of toggle that. But really, when it comes to treatment options, it's about the treatment factor here. So the treatment factor here is set at the high end of 26 parts per million for nitrogen removal. That's a Title V system. And as we know, Title V systems don't remove any nitrogen at all. They weren't designed to do that. They were designed to remove pathogens and protect drinking water, down to 0. And the centralized treatment facilities get anywhere from 3 to 5, 3 to 8 parts per million. So when we select the 8 parcels, we get this pretty pie chart here that shows you the land use breakdown. And so half of those are residential and half of those are commercial. So 8 parcels, 4 residential, 4 commercial. And then it shows you the flow associated with those 8 parcels. Now the yellow is the existing flow, the blue is the future flow. So they're close to one another. So what that tells us about those 8 parcels is they're basically built out. So we look at the nitrogen load. The existing nitrogen load in blue, the future nitrogen load in green, and the delta, or the difference there, is in red. And again, it suggests that there isn't a lot of build-out potential there, that those parcels are really already built up. And then we get into estimated costs. So this will show you what the estimated costs are for conventional Title V systems. So this right now shows you those costs based in dollars per year. So, and collectively, depending on how many parcels you select. So those 8 parcels, annually, if they had to install the Title V systems, would have a cost of about $8,000, about $1,000 a parcel. Now that's over 20 years at a 5% interest rate. Now, all of these assumptions will be published and completely transparent, and to the extent that people want to critique it and find better numbers, we can always adjust the model at that point. That's another beauty of the model. And then the O&M costs about $800 a year. So about $1,000 a year on capital and about $100 a year for operation and maintenance of an existing Title V system. And so you can see the treatment factor set up to 26 there. If we move that treatment factor down to about 22 or so, 18 to 22, 19 to 22, this really starts to mimic an IA system. You know, what you can take out of it with an innovative alternative system. So if we go back to the nitrogen loads, you can see the old nitrogen loads for Title V, but you can see them start to drop now. So that nitrogen is coming down because you're using a better treatment option that removes more nitrogen. And but then we see the cost. So you see the cost go from $8,000 for those parcels to almost 16. So it almost doubles, a little less than doubles. And then you see those O&M costs really start to skyrocket. You know, so they really, yes.
Just a question, please. Those costs are for new construction or upgrading an existing system? Just a question.
Yeah. Right now, the cost models are sort of absolute, except for like new construction. How much it would cost you if you had to do something there. So it doesn't take into account what you already have. Now,
Okay,
you know,
just a.
and that, because that will be a factor on IA systems, certainly. Not such a factor on others. Now, we have 3 towns loaded, so we've got about 55,000 parcels loaded in the model right now, about 165,000 parcels on the Cape, so we're almost about 30% of the way. And in areas that are sewered, for example, because we've done Lewis Bay and Hyannis and Yarmouth, the model does account for sewered parcels and sort of factors that out of the cost, but we're still sort of tweaking that.
Yeah.
But you can see that those IA system costs come up. But you see the nitrogen load continue to drop. And if we toggle it down even further, about 15 or so, 16, we wind up looking at cluster systems. And so then you have a cluster system cost, not that much more than, frankly, the IA system cost, but the O&M really starts to skyrocket down. And so, so we've gone from Title 5 to IA systems to cluster systems. And now we want to look at a centralized sewer system. Now the model requires you to have a certain amount of flow before you can even consider a centralized facility. So this is the actual Phase 1 sewer shed suggested in the town of Yarmouth. So we've selected that entire sewer shed. So you see in that sewer shed, 74% of those parcels are residential, and 20% are commercial, and 6% are other, probably government, more than anything else. And we've ratcheted that treatment factor down now to probably a little bit less than 5, what we anticipate we can get for nitrogen removal from a centralized treatment facility. So now we're talking about really mega flows. And you see a much greater difference here between existing flow and future flow, suggesting that there's a lot more potential for buildup. And then you look at the nitrogen load here, blue existing, green future, and then the change in the nitrogen load. This is all important information. These are total loads. But you look at that red part there, and if you're a town, you'd have to ask yourself if growth management measures might be more cost effective for your tax base than allowing that to happen, having to extend infrastructure. That's one of the questions that you might ask. And then we get into estimated costs. And for the centralized systems, we looked at the collection cost. As a rough estimate, collection is generally 70% of the cost of a centralized facility. And then treatment. And then the O&Ms associated with that. So that's one point in that phase 1, $1.6 million for just the collection system. So really, 3.6, 3.7 million estimated here, and that's annually for 20 years. But it's spread across, all those parcels there, at least as it is accounted for now. Now the cost difficulty in estimating costs on centralized facilities is in the effluent disposal. You can get a wide range of variety and prices there. So ultimately we will build into the model the ability to click on a parcel and say, well, if that's where they're going, and then we'll be able to sort of update the cost and get a much more specific cost there. But we have proved these costs in both Hyannis, Lewis Bay, and in Yarmouth, and they're pretty good. They're very good for comparative purposes. These are not going to give you actual costs. Nobody should take this to the bank. But the relative comparisons are dead on. And so when you're looking at the difference in cost between treatment options, or the difference in cost between 2 towns doing a shared watershed, or the cooperating on them, those are all going to be extraordinarily valuable numbers as they relate to cost. So I think the final piece that we look here is to take an entire sub-watershed, again in Yarmouth, and look at sort of the load, and it's up at Title 5 there right now, and what we're going to do, land use breakdown 95% residential, but the next series of slides is going to ratchet that treatment option down. So when you look at, those are total flows, massive, but you also see not a lot of build-up there. Very small lots, a lot of houses, pretty much built up. But you start with the nitrogen load with Title 5 systems, And then you go to an IA system, cluster system, and a centralized system. And you really see how that nitrogen starts to come out. So ultimately, this model will be able to show you the nitrogen coming out, and will be able to visually determine whether you're close to meeting that TMDL. And so as you play around and put different things in, put them in and take them out, you're going to see whether you're close or not to that TMDL. And then associated with that, as you choose a treatment option, you'll be able to see the costs associated with construction and operation and maintenance. And this is the desktop version. So, and it's a little bit complicated, and there's a ton of functionality yet to be built into this, and this will become internally a very important technical tool for us to use. But we are in the process now of transitioning this to a web-based program that will have, it'll be easier to use. The user interface will be a lot easier. So instead of toggling through a treatment factor, you just be able to say centralized, IA, toilets, whatever it is. And you will also have in the web version the ability to, if you're familiar with sort of the paintbrush option, so you can select a treatment option, go into a particular neighborhood and say this side of the street's going to be sewered, this side is going to be IA systems, and you'll get these results. Nitrogen removal, costs associated with that, and ultimately the ability to break it down and spread those costs however you want to do that on a local level. So that's sort of the presentation of the model to date and where we are. But I think it really sort of underscores what we've been trying to do at the Commission here, which is support local efforts and use information better and use it in a way, because this I think is a strong tool if you have 3 towns in one watershed, of showing them the least costly way to sort of go about solving the problem. Especially if they are potentially all independently going to be under some sort of mandate to clean it up. And in some of these situations, it might be that 2 towns share a watershed. One town is in it for a little, but they may be required to do some treatment in order to remove that if a court ordered that. But with 3 towns together, that town might only be able to pay money, which would be much less expensive than building and maintaining capital facilities, to that sort of intermunicipal watershed program. And so this really illustrates that in a way that I think people will can have some faith and confidence and can start to have much better discussions about how we're going to fix this with the absolutely smallest footprint we can build in a way that is responsible to taxpayers. And so this is what we've been doing on wastewater. This is where the strategic information comes in, and these are the kind of applications that we've already built. This application has intellectual property associated with it too, and it will be copyrighted. It's copyrighted, well, it's subject to copyright. And it's been incredibly gratifying to me to know that we actually have the capacity at the Cape Cod Commission to do this kind of thing, because most areas don't. But we do. We've got some really talented, really smart people that have been working on these maps in this area for a long time, and they've taken hold of this project, and they've really gone beyond my wildest expectations in being able to produce this. Now, we've shown this to EPA. We'll show it to DEP in a couple of weeks. We'll show it to IBM. So we have peer-reviewed it as much as possible. We showed it to the Barnstable Citizens Advisory Committee on Wastewater last night. And so I want people to criticize the model. I want to find out if there are any weak points in it. And so that's why at this beta version, we're sort of taking it for a spin. But I have to tell you, there's not a lot, I haven't found a lot of holes in it yet. I haven't really found any. And I think people are amazed at what we can do, and I think they see the potential not only as a technical tool and the possible integration into the MEP that will allow you to do your modeling runs a lot more quickly and less expensively, but also as a way to really explain to the population who's going to be saddled with this expense how it works and how you can really try to make it as small as possible. And then, of course, the other sort of utility this has is in a defensive posture with any litigation. You know, we don't want, we hear a lot about the Mass Water Resources Authority for the Cape. And I used to chuckle until people really started taking it seriously. But, you know, I don't think there's another person on the Cape who has more anti-MWRA credentials than I do. Because I have sued them twice. You know, one on behalf of ratepayers, when they tried to soak the ratepayers in the greater Boston area for the Quabbin Reservoir twice. They bought it once, they tried to make them buy it again. And we went to a single justice, the SJC, on that. And then I sued them over the construction of the outfall pipe. And argued that case, you know, a year out of law school in front of a full bench. So I know the MWRA. I don't think that model works here. They were dealing with a very different thing 25 years ago. They were dealing with an incredibly dilapidated system that they just hadn't done anything to. But the infrastructure were there, the easements, all of that stuff was there. 85% of the flows on the Cape aren't hooked up to any sort of collection system at all. We couldn't, so it's not the same kind of regional approach that we need down here. You know, my fear is that if we don't act before the court does, that they like to just copy things, cookie cutter, and bring them down. But it's not going to work here. I think we can do it better. I think we can do it in a uniquely Cape Cod way. I think we can do it in a way that promotes regional flexibility and regulatory flexibility to try some new things. And I think we can really be an example to the rest of the country, because every other coastal community is dealing with the same thing, if we get it right. And I think this tool allows us to have that conversation in a way that I think is very non-threatening to people. So I want to thank my staff, who are all incredible people, for their contribution to that, because I really think that this is a step forward. And that's our explanation. So you'll start to see different versions of this on the street, but I wanted you to understand what this wastewater model is, and even as powerful as this individual tool is, how it fits into our new way of thinking about information and using it and working with towns to help decrease their structural deficits municipally and decrease tax burdens on people. There's a huge opportunity for savings here if we can get by the parochialism and the anti-regional rhetoric and the suspicion that has really crossed over into sort of cynicism. I won't say paranoid delusion, but we're getting close. So that's my presentation. Are there any questions? Glenn?
One of the questions that has come up when I talk to people about this is, will the opposition be able to go in and change TMDLs? Because there's a group in Orleans, for example, who has actually determined that that's what they're going to do. And will they be able to use this tool to support their case?
Now, I don't know specifically. They won't be able to change TMDLs. I mean, and the other thing, and it's a good point, because this is a very high-level operation that we showed you today. We're designing the web base for really more of a moderate level. You know, we're looking at decision makers, boards of selectmen, town managers, town administrators. And so the level of tweaking or functionality is going to drop as you go to a wider audience. And then ultimately, we'd like to make some version available for citizens. But there'll be a decreased functionality, so the kind of things that we don't allow flexibility on become important, and TMDLs is one of them. And you know, from my perspective, it wouldn't do us any good to put a tool out there that allowed you to change TMDLs below a level that we're legally mandated to meet, because that serves no purpose. I mean, if you want to do that, then you're in the group that
Terrorists.
well, you want to change, you want to change the classification of water bodies is really what you want to do, and go from Class B to Class C. And, I mean, if you want Pleasant Bay to be environmentally, have the water quality graded to be the same as New Bedford Harbor, go ahead, but I would assume that's going to have a fairly massive impact on your economy. So that's, and I think those are the kind of discussions that we can have. That's a good question. Austin?
Two things. We have neighboring towns which actually came up at town meeting for us as we're going into phase 4 of that neighboring town, whether or not we've had the conversations, whether or not to bring them into the system, and that's still up and that's still in discussion. We'll just say that. But how about a review of what it already established? Because one of my concerns has always been, have we built the system for the future? You know, not just keep doing as we've been doing now, and to a point now, where's the expansion of the existing lines are going in?
Yeah.
Did we plan properly? So I presume that under the model that you've shown us, we'll be able to, because you had growth management in there, that it can be clearly audited for the future. So you have the opportunity to make plans as for the Cape, for expanding the Cape or whatever areas that you need to do that. So
Yeah,
that's one of my big concerns.
I think we will be able to have, bring the towns in, use the high-level model, and play around with a lot of that stuff. I mean, where we've looked at it, primarily is in Hyannis, because the expansion of that big facility there is important. So how do you sort of factor in expansion costs and where you go? And I mean, those are all important things, but I think that would work as well in Provincetown, Chatham, Falmouth, you know, to demonstrate. What this has the ability to do is to demonstrate efficiencies. And there is one town, I won't say which, where we have proof of some of this stuff. And you know, there was an area around a pond that was in a phase of the sewering program because it was a dense neighborhood around the pond. But when you run the model, you find out you don't have to sewer it for any environmental reasons. So why are you doing it? And the question, you know, there could be any number of reasons. Maybe there's a big phosphorus issue that they accounted for that we didn't. But more, you know, it could also be that they saw density and they saw ratepayers, and so they grabbed them. Now, you don't want to do that if you don't have to do that. But when you're constrained to one town, just those town boundaries, sometimes those are the decisions that you make, which is sort of using engineering to apportion costs, and you really shouldn't be doing that in the same. In a regional approach, especially in shared watersheds, I think you have the ability to have the same efficiencies or more efficiencies without having to overbuild, overextend in sewer areas that don't need to be sewered. Elizabeth?
Is this going to be worked on in conjunction with other things like restriction on fertilizers? Because this is obviously not the only issue that's contributing.
Yes.
Are there legal possibilities of restricting fertilizer for the county?
No.
Use or anything like that?
No.
Restricting lawns? I mean, how in the world do we go about doing it? Because it is
We don't have, well, you could petition the
major
legislation to
portion.
give us the authority, then we could do it. But we don't have it now.
Yeah.
And this really came up in a lot of the NSTAR discussions around
Yeah.
herbicides. I mean, really, not a lot of authority to deal with that. However, towns like Falmouth have had very successful friendly lawn programs, and we can develop best management practices. We can develop a model bylaw that we think towns should adopt. There are a lot of towns that have gone to organic kind of fertilizer. So I think we could make some, as it relates to municipally, state or federally controlled parcels, I think we can make a lot of impact there. But it's the residential use of fertilizer
Yes, I'm talking
that
about.
is most difficult to control.
Yeah. And organic doesn't necessarily mean it's any better
No,
relative to nitrogen or phosphorus.
Nitrogen is nitrogen.
it
Yeah,
is.
no matter where it comes from.
So
Yeah.
and when I think of even how the commission, maybe we could condition it as a DRI, because you look at DCPs and others, but as you know, I mean, the commission does not interact with single-family homes,
But the
except in very
county
rare.
itself, not the commission. I don't know if there's any way the county itself.
Yeah. You know, I think what you might find, because fertilizers probably account for about 5% of the nitrogen load, that's a problem. And when we start to cost that out, you know, if you can bring 5% down to 2%, and it means that, you know, a $50 million savings over 30 years, I think people might vote that in town. You know? So I think we have to work on best management practices, we have to work on model bylaws, and we have to work, again, on using the information and tying that percentage to costs so that it's easier for towns to make those kind of decisions.
But there's also phosphorus.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if we lose our ponds, we lose our tourists.
Yep.
A good portion of it. And I read something, I don't remember where I read it, where aquaculture's been used to polish the water
Yes.
to help clean up. Is that a consideration for Pleasant
Yes.
Bay? Or any of the ponds, freshwater mussels, or?
We haven't looked, there are two major projects going on right now. One is in Wellfleet, one's in Mashpee, where they're looking at oysters. and co-ops, I think, in one
Because
scenario.
they remove a lot of nutrients.
Yeah, we think that they play a big role in sort of polishing. The problem is if you go, to the Mashpee Road, for example, to look at the project there,
Yeah.
I mean, Mashpee Road is just dead. There's nothing there. So they have to take 5-gallon buckets and prop them up on the bottom to get those cages that they grow them in above the muck. So I have mixed feelings when I go out there. Now in Wellfleet, they're trying to do a more natural approach.
Yeah.
Is actually put them in the ground. And so we're monitoring both, and I think we're going to get some good feedback there. And I hope, because shellfish has been such an important part of the history of the Cape and a traditional industry on the Cape, that if it can also be part of the solution to our biggest problem right now, then that's a wonderful thing. The other thing, as far as treatment options, that the model will account for, I think we'll be able to sort of drop oysters in, but we'll also be able to sort of gauge for sort of culvert openings and some of the natural improvements that we can make that will decrease the need for putting more homes on some sort of advanced treatment system. So we'll be able to model all of that. And then beyond wastewater, looking at water, habitat, other issues like that, I mean, we have the ability to sort of pull down this information and structure it in a way that we can have similar conversations on other issues.
Yeah, because even if we sewer the whole Cape, you've still got years worth of nitrogen and phosphorus working its way through the ground beds. And so you've got to really treat it at both ends.
You do, and it's, when you look at, 80% of the problem is from homes. And you look at the unprecedented growth over the last 3+ decades. And then you look at the time of travel. And so there's no, when this showed up shouldn't surprise anybody. But, in the course of the last generation, there's just been significant degradation in all of these saltwater bodies. The minute eelgrass is gone, the natural current shellfish is gone, it's just gone. And Fred Regan from IFLA often refers to it as our quiet crisis. Because we don't like to talk about it because we're afraid people won't come here in the summer if they find out about it. But that's out of the bag right now. But the good news is when you look at time of travel maps, USGS maps, so much of this discharge is really within time of travel that's 0 to 10 years to the estuaries and embankments. That if you could flip a switch today, within 3 to 5 years you could see significant water quality improvements. So this isn't Chesapeake Bay, it's not Narragansett Bay that have really sort of different hydrology associated with how they work and will be dead for generations. What we've seen seriously degrade in the course of one generation, we can fix in the next. We just have to do it, we have to get together, get smart, and make it happen.
One line on the bridges all the time, but where are they?
That's an accurate statement. Okay,
I just thought you answered my question, but I think the county could be helpful to towns if they wanted to use the organics or the proper fertilizers on public lands, on town-owned lands. And also how to gain the cooperation of golf course managers in terms of using that appropriate fertilizer, the organic, on golf courses. The Falmouth Friendly Lawn Program was very successful with the golf courses in Falmouth, and they still continue to this day not using fertilizers. So I think the county could help with some of that through the extension program.
Yeah, well, golf courses probably are better managers than everybody gives them credit for, because every ounce of fertilizer they put in there, they have to pay for, and it comes off their bottom line. Whereas, Joe Public says 5 pounds is good, 20 pounds is better. And even if it is organic, it's still the same chemicals, just from different sources or in different configurations with the same leachate coming out the other end.
This is the tool. So when we talk about building a regional wastewater management plan, it's not the kind of plan that you think about that's just this big texty thing that's going to wind up on a shelf and get dusted. This has many components to it, and very dynamic components like this tool. This is only one piece of it. The rest of the plan will involve recommendations, and there will be recommendations on culvert openings, natural sort of improvements, one of which may be a suggestion that we get another dredge that can fit under some of these bridges. But another piece, a major piece, has to be about fertilizer control. I do.
I like your analogy where using the MWRA is that I wrote some notes that, you know, other communities, not only in Massachusetts, they're urban or they're suburban, and they have an antiquated wastewater system that just did not work, and so that's how they try to resolve the problem. But they didn't have this tool. This is not the first time I've seen it, so it keeps going around in my head. But for the Cape to recognize the fact that geographically we're rural, we're regional, we're unstructured, we don't have the infrastructure, and which you use as components as to how we're going to fix them. This gives them a preview. You know, when you go on to print, you can hit print preview, and you can see that your margins are right, and so on and so forth. And that's how I see this tool being used, so that we can successfully not have to revisit what the solution was, but the solution should be 100% on target for that particular area that town.
No, I agree, and it's a good point, because I had the opportunity to sit on a statewide committee for the last 18 months on wastewater infrastructure finance. I was a Senate President's appointee there. And so I got to sit with people from all over the state, and they all complained about how there were these huge capital, unmet capital needs for wastewater. You know? But they mostly already had systems. So they're trying to rebuild systems that they built in the 70s and 80s and didn't take care of adequately. And that's huge. The size and scope of what we're facing is completely different. But that's why I think when you look at, if you're predisposed to think that you've got a sewer, and you look at 85% of your flows not being on a centralized collection system, you've got a big problem, you know, huge. But that's because we look at it from that perspective. If we look at the fact that we don't have any infrastructure as an opportunity, then how do we maximize that opportunity? And I think this tool starts to do that. It starts to show us what the possibilities might be. It starts to show regulators what the possibilities might be, so that we can approach this with the kind of infrastructure that really is more respectful to the land and the marine resources that it's intended to protect. So I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to do something new.
Is the county also getting heavily involved with some of the regulations through the Board of Health? I mean, if you put in a composting system, you still have to have Title V because you have gray water. And there are so many ways to deal with gray water, but I don't think we're allowed to do any of them. So that's a real big disconnect, and I don't understand why that isn't on the table too, because that makes a big difference.
State regs make composting.
Thank you, Lynn.
Optional. They do. So I mean, that's another piece that we can look at going forward. Michael?
I think it's been an excellent project, and it's gotten a lot of positive response down in our neck of the woods down in Bourne. One of the perennial problems that we consistently have is I think there's going to be a lot of valuable information that's going to be available for the town of Bourne, but particularly our bigger problem will be applying what you find here to the north side of Bourne, where a lot of our growth is scheduled to start moving forward in the very near future, especially with the growth incentive zone coming before us, and how we can cooperate outside of Commission territory. How do you see this information being used off the reservation, if you will?
That's a good question. Now, we have worked, as you know, in the town of Bourne for over a year now with the Wastewater Advisory Committee on the north side. So we have some really good specific data about what the wastewater needs are up there, and really, and it sort of pointed out that you've got some water supply issues up there that you've got to look at too. So you have a lot more information, you're in a better position to manage that, but you border Wareham and Plymouth. So for example, Makepeace, you know, they're all over, those giant cranberry bogs all over Wareham. They're looking at maybe converting some of those cranberry bogs into wastewater, sort of constructed wetlands for wastewater discharge, for example. So I happen to know the engineer that was doing it and offered to go, and they had like an allergic reaction that the commission was actually going to cross out of their jurisdiction, talk to anybody that they. So I was disinvited from that meeting. But I have thick skin, so you know. So, but the advantage is that what we've developed here, the intellectual property associated with it in the process, I think is applicable outside of the district. So I could see the commission providing technical assistance services to Plymouth and Wareham at their request for a fee. That would come back here and help support what we're doing. And I think when they see what we're doing here, I think they'll want it, because it'll make it easier for them.
Yeah, I just was, as it ran through my mind, this Strategic Information Office, part of that data set might be dollars. How do I take the Strategic Information Office and turn it into a identifier of a revenue stream? I'm thinking how do I gather the data? How do I capture, how that might look? Now, I just think it just kind of...
You mean using the SIO to generate revenue?
Well, that might help. That might be, or what were successful efforts to generate revenue in terms of, it's statistic. Also, it's measurable.
Yep.
And there's been places around the country that have measured it, so I just a thought.
Well, we talked to the county commissioners about that.
Yeah.
The SIO and this structure and expertise that we have here that other parts of the state and the country don't is a valuable exportable resource.
Yep.
And so we think about it that way. We've been trying to convince the assembly that we're doing, but they're not buying it so far.
Yeah.
But it's there. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
Because this is really, this model, even in this beta version, hit the international environmental news line. And so it's gone, and we get a lot of, Jay isn't here today, Jay Dacians, but he's mentioned the Cape Cod Times article and his phone rings. And, there's a lot of interest in this from a technical perspective and from a public policy perspective. So I think it is a resource that we created here, and I think all of our towns should get it for free. But it probably makes sense to charge.
I'm not thinking about it being a revenue stream, about it being a place where it gathers the data about revenue.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah. No.
We can talk about this.
Yeah. Ultimately, there are other data warehouses out there. I mean, Tufts has a fairly big one, and the Division of Local Services at DOR has a lot of information that is related to cost. So. The SIO and our data warehouse, I can envision in the not too distant future agreements with other, data sharing agreements with other data warehouses that makes us even bigger, huge.
I'll send you an email about that.
I have a question.
Yes.
Going back to e-permitting though, and congratulations to both you and the staff. That's outstanding.
I didn't do anything. As usual.
No, getting that grant was great, but I heard you say that e-permitting is not the same as being able to pull up a PDF file.
Yeah.
And I may be one of those people that think that the PDF file is e-permitting. So.
Yeah, big difference. All a PDF file does is allow you to print out a file at home that they would have handed you at town hall.
Right.
But the information isn't treated in any sort of different format. When you are doing e-permitting, the information is, collected in a different way. It's stored, and you can use relational databases to change it around. It just becomes a lot more useful.
Thank you.
Okay. Yep.
I have about 5,000 questions, so I won't ask them.
This is all your stuff.
It's heartening to see that you're making a presentation on this information, what's available. And I think that, some of the remarks you made and some that Peter made and some that others have made, it's clear that for me, my shady background, that this is a product that you can sell and you can market and franchise to other people because it offers a solution. When people go out and ask the 5 W's, one of the things is about the how, and you going through the whole process now of collecting this information. I think it's an excellent tool in the model to actually to carry out the responsibilities of doing what can be done here on the Cape. And because the Cape is is a peninsula that's pretty much isolated from everyone else. You can put up all the models up, and then you can go to other locations, no matter where it is. You can identify in the states where places have problems like this, and they can resolve it. My real concern is how will you be able to get all of the people here on the Cape involved, because I heard you say that you will have each town, whenever each town select someone, but you need to have a particular person.
Yeah, we've talked about, and we're going to town managers, town administrators meeting to talk about that. They're a good group. A lot of them are on the RTA board, and you know, the concept is we would get this governance committee of 15, and they would think about what they needed. But then we'd put ad hoc committees with more technical expertise on every individual application. But they would roll up to the governance committee, which rolls up to the strategic information officer here at the...
I'd like to see this one sort of disappearing off the end, because if you don't have someone who's actually championing this whole process, someone you identified, I almost think would have to be consistent right across every town, either it's the deputy town manager or the town manager, but someone has to be responsible.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's going to shift all over the place. And this problem is too important for it not to have someone who's actually a championing of it and actually not reporting on it on a monthly basis. I mean, all of the towns are having, they have town meetings. I can't see why there can't be a 5 or 10 minute discussion about this is what's been going on with wastewater, because this is really the elephant that's in the room that nobody can see. They can hear it, but they can't see it. And so I think that what you presented here, it is simply, it confirms the remarks that many of us have made all along. You've got a tremendous staff of people putting things together here, and that's really evidence of it. You know, so my hat's off to you.
Thank you.
This leadership, okay?
Thank you.
I was in high school in the late 40s, and I remember throwing the cocks, and we were out on the Charles River. I remember throwing the cocks into the Charles River. And in those days, you could do that and not have the guy dead by the time he surfaced. But 10 years later, in the mid-50s, I was hired by C.A. McGuire to do a study of the Charles River. And I spent the 2 summers going up and down the river and identifying pollutants on the river. Today, the Charles River has been cleaned up and people are back swimming in it.
Yeah.
So the wonderful thing about all of this is that there are models out there where this has happened.
Yes.
And we are moving in the right direction in some areas.
Yeah. No, we're going to fix this. I have no idea we're going to fix it. I just don't want to be forced to fix it.
Yeah.
But we're going to fix it.
They were.
Yeah.
But it got done.
Roger.
2 things, Paul. One, I strongly support the idea of trying to get at town meetings in the current cycle just to explain what's going on. I mean, there is so much of mystery about the wastewater management thing. Everybody says, oh my God, and if you could get selectmen to invite you for a 10-minute presentation at town meeting, just the shortest possible thing would say this, it isn't going to kill you, let's be reasonable kind of a thing. The second one is, and this follows J.D.'s point, your key here isn't the collection of data, it's development of the algorithms which you're going to use.
No question. That's where the value is added.
That's where the value is added, and whether you, unless you set up sort of a separate staff that's going to spend its time doing algorithms, aren't we better off for a while to apply what you have that works, give them the cake?
Yes. Okay. And that's exactly what we're going to do.
Yes.
But the algorithm is the key.
It is. It is. It's the...
Have you considered actually putting, this particular presentation sort of addresses the things that Roger pointed out, and it's information that people need to know. And I would think that every town has got a website. If you had a thing there that says what's going on in wastewater, and there was a link to this particular presentation, I think it would allow people to sit there and go through and write out all the questions and raise all of the whatever real or imaginary complaints against it, but at least they can see what's going on, because I listened very intently to what your presentation was, and I was looking for holes in it. Unfortunately, I couldn't really hear in it because I could hear that you was actually solving a problem.
I thought you were going to say because I was mumbling.
So I think it would really be good for all of the towns to actually put the link on their web, so they says, okay, this is what's happening on wastewater, and then people can sit there and go through it without having to try to drag everybody through the meeting. And then when they come to a meeting, town meeting, or at least they have some questions with substance, because we all know the process that goes on in town meetings. It's not always real, most is imaginary.
Well, I've been doing this for a while, and I'm still amazed at it's been the last 7 years in one shape or form running around the Cape talking about wastewater, and so shocked at how many people don't know. But you can't knock on everybody's door, although maybe you can. Nancy at the hospital is sitting in the corner of the room. We revamped our website, so we're sort of ready to go. And Erin Jackson here, who is our most valuable player on wastewater, we're all over the Twitter sphere now. So we're on Facebook and Twitter, and we're doing this stuff, and we're posting things. And so we're much more savvy about social media and how to do that sort of outreach. But we are going to continue to do everything we need to do. I've submitted an op-ed to the Cape Cod Times. I think we'll probably run next week. And we're going to go to C3 TV, and we're going to encapsulate some of this stuff. We're going to push that out, make sure that it's run and run over again on cable. And we'll go to town meetings if we have to go to town meetings. It might be that we could do a 4-minute info loop that you could just show at town meeting. It'd be easier than sort of it allows us to get to all of them. But we're open to any suggestions you have about how we can get the word out. We're open.
Okay, there isn't any other business. I do have one piece here. Peter, please announce that the nominating committee has been selected. Committee members are Ernest Virgilio, Jack McCormick, and Lynn Short. This committee will begin the process of nominating new officers for a 1-year term beginning July 1st. Anyone interested in serving as commission chair, vice chair, or secretary should contact the nominating committee. Once the committee has met and nominations have been made, they will present the slate of new officers to the full commission. At May 10th meeting, the nominating committee will present the slate of new officers. At May 24th meeting, the full commission will vote on the slate of new officers. There will be an email that comes out. I'm not so sure, Lynn, are you the only one here from the nominating committee? I don't know, who are we going to... So, for example, if somebody wants to raise their hand for a certain position and throw their hat in the ring, who do they send the email to? You or Lynn or Ernie or you? Respond to your email?
Send it to me, and then I will forward it to the nominating.
Okay, very good. And if
Nominate Ernie.
I plan. I also think you could push this stuff to the little kids in the grammar schools and make them go home and get on mom and dad's back about it. So that might tell you about it. Okay, so any other Cape Cod Commission member comments?
Yes.
Yes.
I read the announcement about the between 2 and 4, putting up a cable and asking whoever's doing it, I think it's the DOT, to actually suspend this whole thing.
Yeah.
My question is, did the other towns support this, or is this being viewed as a standalone effort? Because it's very important.
We have reached out, and we circulate with the delegation, so I expect the entire delegation is going to sign a similar letter. But they sort of wanted us to do our own thing, so we did.
Yeah, but it comes off as that you're the only guy that's doing anything. And this is impacting all of the towns on the Cape.
Yeah, it is impacting us. That's why we did it.
I know, but I was just curious whether or not you were actually getting any support, so it seems as though it's not really there, because I would expect that announcement to go out, and all 15 of either the chairman of the Board of Selectmen and the chair of the commission, the Boston County Commission, to be named on this thing, because this is very important.
Yeah, I think it was really Glenn Cannon, our technical services director, came to me and said, these are the different projects that are going on. They don't really need to do this one this year. Yeah. We've never had a crossover. so accident, so why do they have to do it this year? And we just felt it was important to get out there as quickly as possible, and so that's what we did.
Did you expect to get any response from it?
I do, because we never complain about anything. So,
Okay.
I mean, maybe I'm an optimist, but I think that they'll give it some consideration. And it will be followed up, I think, with support from the towns and certainly support from the legislative delegation.
I hope you don't have a demand on need for oxygen.
No,
Okay,
I can hold my breath for a long time.
all right.
Anyhow, my congratulations to you, sir, for stepping up and facing the problem that bothered all of us.
I will pass along your gratitude to Glenn.
Yes. And tell them to stay away from 149. No more work over there. And the only reason why I complain about it is because they didn't bother to put up signs to say there's construction going on down at 149.
Wow.
You didn't know anything about it until you were in the midst of it and you couldn't turn around. You know, I thought, this is ridiculous.
There were two letters. One was DOT about maybe not doing one of these projects this year. Actually, the other was to the Army Corps to get better signage up.
Yeah.
They did a much better job with their intelligent transportation systems and signage when they did the construction 2 years ago.
Entertain a motion to adjourn.
Oh, before we go over.
Moved and second, all in favor, say aye.
Running up.
Thanks for getting.